President Cyril Ramaphosa has appointed former Deputy Finance Minister Mcebisi Jonas as a special envoy to the United States of America. He'll serve as the official representative of the President and the Government of the Republic of South Africa. In this capacity, Mr. Jonas will advance South Africa's diplomatic, trade and bilateral priorities. He'll also lead negotiations to foster strategic partnerships.
This appointment underscores Mr. Jonas's distinguished career and continued commitment to advancing South Africa's national and economic interests. For decades, South Africa and the United States of America have maintained a historical and strategic relationship. In the interest of our country, our region, and the rest of our continent, President Ramaphosa remains committed to rebuilding and maintaining this relationship for more decades on the basis of mutual respect, recognition of each other's sovereignty, and benefit for our respective peoples.
Well, Jonas is currently an independent, non-executive chairman of telecommunications company MTN Group, a role he will continue to hold alongside the envoy position. Ramaphosa said this appointment underscores Jonas' distinguished career and continues to advance South Africa's national interest. For more on this now, we're joined by SABC reporter Khayelihle Khumalo. Good afternoon.
Well, certainly a very good afternoon to you, Juliet. Of course, a very important announcement there coming from South Africa, where President Ramaphosa really just appoints Mr. Jonas to a very colossal responsibility, especially given the very significance between South Africa and the U.S. Currently, very strained relations. I mean, for the past couple of weeks or so, we saw where Mr. Zane Dango, the current G20 Sherpa, really went to the U.S. To engage with his counterparts, but also really showing the gravity and a very enormity of the responsibility ahead for Mr. Jonas, especially given the acumen, Juliet, that he possesses, but really on the sidelines of a very important as well events here in Sandton. We're joined, of course, by Dr. Stavros Nicola, of course, is with Aspen. So, your fleeting reaction to these developments, the announcement by President Ramaphosa. Of course, Mr. Jonas, no stranger to trying to get investment for South Africa. We saw that he wanted almost like a similar position, but your fleeting reaction to these developments, Doctor?
Firstly, I think it's a very good development. I say so because President Trump deals with envoys. If you ever look at how he structures his negotiations, he deals with envoys. So why that is important is, and why this appointment is particularly important for the following reasons. Firstly, the United States is our second biggest trading partner and our second biggest investor in South Africa. So we cannot afford to ignore the relationship. Yes, it is strained, as you correctly say, and I think appointing an envoy is some attempt to narrow the gap, or that strained gap that we are seeing at the moment. The other thing that's important is you've got a political perspective and you've got a trade perspective, and the two are intertwined. So you need someone that is sufficiently skilled both on the political side and on the business side to try and get this intertwining framed correctly, so that we do present an attractive proposition to the United States. And Jonas is a very good candidate. He understands politics. He's been in business. He's been the chairman of listed companies. So I think he's an excellent choice from that perspective. And then very lastly, we toyed around as a country with an idea of, do we replace an ambassador or don't we? Do we rather send an envoy first? And if that envoy makes sufficient progress, then you can look at appointing an ambassador. The risk of sending another ambassador now, and not knowing whether that ambassador will be well received or not, was a big risk. And one way of mitigating that risk is, let us send an envoy who's skilled, as Jonas is, and can hopefully lay some type of a foundation from which we can narrow the gaps that I spoke about earlier.
And just once again, Doctor, I mean, a very important gathering here. It's all about boosting Africa's pharmaceutical capabilities, a very big issue in the context of the outbreak of diseases. We've seen Mpox, we've seen COVID-19, where the continent was caught with its pants down. So let's look at the significance of this gathering and also just a way forward, especially given the role that's played by the likes of Aspen right here in Africa.
Look, I think today is very much about, again, positioning and framing to the G20 community the need for Africa to have its own manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing independence. We saw what happened during COVID and beyond COVID recently with Mpox, where Africa was left in the lurch. We were at the back end of the queue. Now, that doesn't lend itself to global peace and security, which is one of the things that the G20 is highly seized with. The thematic for this year's G20, which South Africa is hosting, of course, is solidarity, equity and sustainability. And nothing speaks more closely to that theme than if you have health equity, which we don't have at the moment. So today was very much about how can you galvanize the immense resources capacity that the G20 does have at its disposal to accelerate domestic and regional pharmaceutical and vaccine manufacturing on the continent. How do you do it with speed? And a number of interesting points and developments made today, not least the fact that we need to sort out the regulatory environment in Africa in order to accelerate this, but we also need the international procurement agencies that are procuring these vaccines and these other countermeasures, antiretrovirals, that when they procure them, they look to Africa first for procurement so that Africa is producing for Africa, from Africa. And then very lastly, the other interesting thing that has come out today is Dr. Jean Kaseya, the Director General of Africa CDC, put out a very alarming slide today. And he said he is 200% certain that Africa is going to move to another pandemic. And he says it is likely to be occasioned because of the donor fund cuts. So referencing HIV and TB. If those programs collapse on the ground because there's no funding now, what happens is the infection rates are going to spiral. They're going to increase exponentially, and you're going to have people migrating around the continent, moving to those areas where there are healthcare facilities, and then you're going to get political and social instability. So we need to get to grips with this as a continent. How do you do that? The first thing you've got to do is ensure that you have security of supply. You can only do that if you have your own local manufacturing on the continent, both domestically and regionally. That is the loudest message that came out today. And we better sort out this HIV thing, or 2 decades of progress on HIV will be unraveled before our very eyes.
All right. Doctor, before I let you go, very turbulent times in terms of the global market, the sentiment in terms of investment. What are you gauging from your counterparts, especially since you wear your other hats with the BRICS Council and many other fora as well?
Look, there's no doubt that there's a globally suppressed sentiment. Of course, it's been triggered by the trade and tariff changes, seismic. Some people are describing it that we haven't in 50 years seen such seismic tariff and trade shifts. They're creating a lot of uncertainty. Uncertainty is not good for any business anywhere around the world. It's not good for investors. And I think the overarching sentiment amongst business people right now is that we need to hasten to get towards some element of stability in these trade and tariff changes that we're seeing. There are no winners in tariff wars, and we hope that there's going to be a de-escalation imminently. We also hope as a South African business community that South Africa is able to accelerate a trade deal with the United States in whatever form or shape. I think we should accept that AGOA, as we know it today, is probably not going to survive beyond September, which is the period where it would be reauthorized, and we need to start planning, and are planning as a country between business and government, that we're able to enter a new trade deal with the United States. The US is far too important a trade and investment partner for our country for us not to secure a deal, and that's what we ought to be doing.
All right. Doctor, thank you so much indeed for that. So a very interesting day here in St. Juliet's, a plethora of issues being explored, but we'll certainly be positioned here. With that, back to you in